This show is produced by the Hartman Media Company. For more information and links to all our great podcasts, visit hartmanmedia.com.
Welcome to the American Monetary Association's podcast, where we explore how monetary policy impacts the real lives of real people and the action steps necessary to preserve wealth and enhance one's lifestyle.
It's my pleasure to welcome Andrew Puzder to the show. He is the former CEO of CKE Restaurants. If you are not familiar with him, they are the parent company for Hardee's and Carl's Jr. Certainly you're familiar with those big brands. He's the former nominee for Secretary of Labor under President Trump, the #1 best-selling author of Job Creation, How It Really Works and Why Government Doesn't Understand It, and The Capitalist Comeback, the Trump Boom and the Left's Plot to Stop It, Getting America Back to Work, and It's Time to Let America Work Again. Andy, welcome. How are you?
Great, Jason. Good to be here. Thank you.
It's good to have you. And you're coming to us from your summer location, which is northern Michigan, right?
Up in northern Michigan, up on Traverse Bay off of Lake Michigan. So,
yeah.
Nice and cool in the summer.
Beautiful area for sure. Beautiful area. Well, hey, there has been much talk, and it's become an obvious political football, these quarantines and lockdowns, and it seems like everything is a political football nowadays. Even, if someone tells me whether or not they believe in hydroxychloroquine, I can tell you who they're going to vote for. It's absolutely an almost ridiculous world we're living in, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Talk to us about the thesis of your short and easy to get through book about getting America back to work, or letting America go back to work.
Yeah, it's a pamphlet. Encounter Books calls them broadsides, which it lays out the arguments for why we should let Americans get back to work. We should start getting life back to normal. We had the Democrats, look, they've been very open about this. They said from the beginning they viewed pandemic as a means to enact their agenda. Even Joe Biden made a comment. This is an opportunity to remake America. Well, we really don't need to remake America. We've come through the worst of the pandemic. In fact, there was a declaration. It's called the Barrington Declaration, came out by, it was written by 3 virologists, so virus experts, one from Harvard, one from Stanford, one from Oxford. And it's been signed on to by over 6,600 medical professionals and over 14,000 medical practitioners. And it says, look, these lockdowns are a bad idea. They hurt people. They hurt poor people. They cause more harm than they do good. The World Health Organization just came out last week and said the same things. Don't lock your economies down. We're creating starvation across the world. We're really doing great harm to people. This is not helping. People aren't getting the medical care that they need. And, the CDC came out about 2 weeks ago and said survivability rates. I'll tell you quickly, I don't want to bury in numbers, but if you're from birth to 19, your chances of surviving COVID, if you get it, are 99.997%. If you're between the ages of 20 and 49, it's 99.8%. And if you're between 40 and 69, it's 99.5%. It only drops to 94.6% if you're over 70.
Right.
So the survivability rate on this is very high. We didn't lock the economy down to prevent people from getting sick. We locked it down to prevent people from dying. And with the therapeutics we've got, as President Trump demonstrated, it's time to let people get back out there.
And not only that, it's also about the health of the patient and if they have comorbidity factors and all kinds of things.
Yes.
I mean, there are so many ways to lie with statistics. And, this is being used as just such a football to enact all sorts of agendas. But I'll tell you, you alluded to it, and, various people in the media, and Trump has alluded to it too, of course, they don't seem to be doing a great job of really explaining. I like to talk, Andy, a lot on the show about how you can't hear the dogs that don't bark. And, you may flatten the curve with a lockdown, or maybe that's debatable, but let's not even debate that. There are other problems created by lockdowns: depression, alcoholism, drug abuse, all sorts of domestic violence issues. People should not be locked down for many reasons. Not just, it would be very myopic to simply look at the COVID infection rate, because there are all these knock-on problems that occur with these lockdowns, aren't there?
Yes, there are. There actually were 2 medical foundations that came out as early as May and said, we're dealing with an epidemic within the pandemic. And the epidemic was suicides, drug addiction, alcoholism, as you said, domestic abuse, real problems, people not getting the medical care they need.
Right.
Mammograms, people aren't going in getting mammograms, which is going to lead to breast cancer in women. So there's a lot of contravailing factors here, and lockdowns are not the answer. You do level the curve, but I think what we're finding is that if you don't let the thing run its course, as they did in Sweden and as happened in New York, that doesn't mean you shouldn't protect the vulnerable. Look, I don't mean to demean anybody's loss of life or their suffering at all, but we got to protect the people that are vulnerable. But if you look at New York and Sweden, there's really nobody dying from this disease there. Very, very few people. They've gotten this kind of under control, and they didn't do the lockdowns. And this is why the World Health Organization and virologists and the CDC have all come up with evidence showing that these lockdowns really are not good long-term solutions to this problem. Mm-hmm. And if you just look at the unemployment rate, you talked about it being political. So we had in August, which is the most recent month for which we have the state unemployment rates, there were 10 states that had 6% or lower unemployment. 9 of them were Republican governors, and one of them had a Democrat governor. That was Montana, which is a conservative state. If you look at the worst unemployment rates, there were 10 states that had over 10% unemployment, including New York, California, our old home states, Illinois, New Jersey. 9 of those had Democrat governors. The one that didn't have a Democrat governor was very liberal Massachusetts. Obviously, this is very political. We're not doing what we should do to address the disease. The arguments for what we should do are in the booklet. It's time to let America work again. We're putting politics where we shouldn't put it.
No, it's not about people's health and caring. And it's amazing how the script has flipped. I look at that on the left side of the spectrum, and if Trump does one thing or says one thing, they're all upset about it. Oh, people are going to die, blah, blah, blah. And then if he does the opposite thing later and changes his mind, they're all upset about that. It's like, how can you win? You cannot win.
Well, opening schools is a perfect example for that. Everybody was for opening schools. So, the left-leaning states, everybody was talking about we have to open schools. Trump came out and said, we should open the schools. And all of a sudden, all the Democrats were afraid the kids were going to die. They were going to be lined up like cordwood in the halls. But the fact of the matter is that this disease really doesn't affect kids. Very, very rare. Well, they'll suffer serious consequences from the disease. So the president's son, Barron, just had this disease and recovered from it.
Yeah.
Now there is a danger with big families that they'll infect older members of the family. And again, we do have to protect those people.
Right.
But the risk to children from going to the big risk is that they don't go to school, not that they do go to school.
And it's just like anything else in life. We protect the vulnerable because we're a good society. It doesn't mean you make this blanket rule. I mean, it's the idea of you help an old lady across the street because she's vulnerable. So yes. No one's saying we shouldn't help the vulnerable, but it doesn't mean it should be this blanket solution, if you will. I'd like to ask you a little bit about some of your other work and your experience, running CKE and so forth, if we could touch on that for just a moment.
Sure.
One of the things I did not know until we talked just before we started recording today is that you moved the company out of Southern California. We both are, lived in Southern California, and, CKE was based in Anaheim. I was in Irvine, Newport Beach. You probably lived in the same areas, I'm guessing. And I remember Carl Karcher used to dine at the Pacific Club. I was a member there years ago, and you would go there too. And I did not know you moved the company to Tennessee in 2016. Tell us about that.
Well, when Jerry Brown won his second term, we knew the taxes were going up. We knew that there were going to be these horrific regulatory burdens that they were putting on people. And I think, I should point out the important thing with respect to California was it was meaningful that we moved the corporate headquarters, and that's about 150 jobs. But the fact of the matter is that 5 years before that, we stopped building restaurants in California. And that's where you really create a lot of jobs. I mean, at one point in California, we had 20,000 employees between the company and our franchisees. But as a company, we stopped building. Now, the franchisees kept building restaurants. Yeah, right. But as a company, and we owned about half of them, we stopped because the regulatory burdens when it came to building restaurants were so horrific, it just didn't make any sense. We ended up moving the whole company out of the state. It's funny, when Jerry Brown was elected, I called my executive team in, which was about 8-9 people. And I said, look, ladies and gentlemen, I think we need to move. I think we need to get out of California. And I expected everybody to go. We lived at that. I had moved the company, the headquarters from Anaheim to Carpinteria, California, which is right outside of Santa Barbara. We all lived in Santa Barbara. I lived in Montecito, which is, just a beautiful place to live.
Oh, sure.
Oprah lives there, I think. It's a wonderful place.
Yep.
But I called everybody in. I thought they were going to go nuts. And everybody except for one guy, everybody said, we're in. Uh-huh. Let's go. When do we leave?
Right. Well, because they experienced the same thing you did at a corporate level at CKE. They experienced that same thing at a household, a family level, and an individual level. What I noticed in California, and I really wanted to move for about 15 years, probably from 1995 until I finally left in 2011. And what I realized is that you just don't want to live under a government that is desperate and broke, because they become predatory on their citizens. And so all kinds of little ways that, people don't really talk much about, it never makes it to the media, the cost of a parking ticket, the cost of a speeding ticket, the cost of your car registration, all of these you got to do the smog check on your car every 2 years. And, it's like I got a brand new car under a lease. Why do I have to do a smog check? I haven't modified it. It's like these absurd rules. And they just wear on people. They just cost them money all the time.
I'll give you some examples in the business sector. During my time at CKE, we had restaurants in about 45 states and 40 foreign countries. Those foreign countries included Russia and China.
How many units altogether between Hardee's and Carl's Jr. around the world?
About 3,800 units worldwide.
Okay.
And it was easier to build and open a new restaurant in Novosibirsk, which is in Siberia, than it was to open one in Los Angeles. It was easier to open in Shanghai, China, than it was to open in Los Angeles or San Francisco.
And you think China, a communist country, would be more difficult, but it's actually easier.
No, it's we used to be on investor calls, and I'd be the one speaking. Investors would ask, why are your costs so high in California? I always say, well, welcome to the socialist state of California. Yeah. I mean, that was where we were living. I finally, when people ask me, why'd you move? I tell them I'm not a socialist. I couldn't live in a socialist state. I mean, one more Bernie Sanders bumper sticker, and I think I was going to have a heart attack.
Yeah.
It just was politically, it was not a fun place to live.
Right. Yeah, it's just the burden becomes just incredible. Can you cite any of those regulations? I mean, I can certainly give you examples,
sure.
But why was it so difficult to just open a new restaurant? How did they make it difficult? Like, any specifics about that you can share?
Well, most of the initial difficulties in opening would be zoning requirements. Mm-hmm. Before you got a permit to build, they'd want you to put in a street light 2 blocks away that had nothing to do with your restaurant. I mean, the cities and state and counties in the city are so starved for cash because all of the money goes into public employee pension fund benefits. Right. Yep. So you've got a very small percentage of the tax dollars that are collected that actually go to anything other than salaries and benefits for the teachers and firemen and policemen, and God bless firemen and policemen. But the teachers union controls the state.
Yeah. Well, so you've got on a national level, the NEA, I call it the National Extortion Association. I mean, it's unbelievable that they couldn't care less about education. In fact, there is that infamous speech of the president of the NEA years ago, and it's recorded, it's on video, and maybe you can find it online if Google hasn't suppressed it like they do, where they literally, he or she, I can't even remember, it was years ago, was standing up at a podium at one of their conferences saying, we don't care about children, we don't care about education, we care about ourselves. That was unbelievable,
Well, they're now raising they passed Proposition 13 years ago, so you couldn't increase taxes once you bought a piece of property.
Which, by the way, when Howard Jarvis did that in 1978, that was one of the things I've always theorized that really allowed California's property market to keep booming all those years.
Yes.
You take away Prop 13 and the real estate market is going to suffer greatly in California, beyond all of the other problems it has. But go ahead with what you're saying.
And so this year they've got on the ballot, they're going to remove the Proposition 13 limit on commercial property. And the teachers have come out and said, they've been very clear about this. This is where they're going to get the money to continue to increase their salaries and their benefits. I mean, they are just going to tax that state to death. So you've got real problems open. Then when you open California, for example, you're probably used to the 40-hour work week. You work 40 hours. If you work 41 hours, you get an hour of overtime, which is time and a half. In California, they don't have a 40-hour work week. They have an 8-hour work day. If you work 8 hours on Monday and you work 1 hour on Tuesday, you get overtime for the 1 hour you worked on Tuesday. I mean, they have rest, but you have to take. We had a ton of lawsuits all over the state, not just our company, but every company.
Right.
If you don't give your employees a rest break at certain times, they can sue. Yeah. And if you've got a business like a restaurant, maybe a bus with 60 retired people pulls up at 2:00. Well, if 3 of your employees are on rest break or your general manager's on rest break, your restaurant's screwed. And the people coming in aren't going to get the service tickets. It just was almost impossible to operate a business in California. It got more and more difficult. And now Uber and Lyft are having a problem with. They want to turn their employees into, or their independent contractors into employees. I mean, everything they can do to make it hard to operate a business, they will do.
And interestingly, the Lyft and the Uber drivers say they don't want to be employees. They don't want to be cut out of the opportunity to go drive their cars and have flex time and do whatever they want, make their own hours. They don't want to be employees. The state is supposedly doing it for their good, but it's not for their good at all. John Stossel did a great piece on that. He's been on the show before. And, I'll tell you something else. You'll relate to this, Andy. I had a labor attorney that I hired years ago when I lived in Orange County. Her name was Nancy. And she said that her colleagues that work in Los Angeles, when they take an employer to court in L.A., they call it the bank. That's what they call the courthouse in LA. They say, I'm going to the bank, because they know that the judges all view the companies as just evil, big, terrible companies, and they will always lose and the employee will always win, no matter how right or wrong anybody is. It's just the predisposition of the judges that they just are driving business away. And so they ultimately cause, unemployment. I mean, it's so counterproductive.
And it wasn't just the judge. I was an attorney in California before I became CEO of this company. I was Carl Karcher's attorney. He was the founder. But it's also the juries. You go to Los Angeles County and you're trying a lawsuit. You're trying it to a bunch of juries who have been convinced that every business is bad. Every business wants to take advantage of people. Every business is evil. And it's very difficult to get a fair hearing for a business. So you end up settling a lot of cases you wouldn't otherwise settle.
Right.
So it's a cost of doing business when you're in California.
It's extortion, basically.
Extortion.
It's basically extortion. So anything you want to say, Andy, about job creation, the capitalist comeback, your other two books, thank you for sharing that because that's, like inside information that people don't often hear what you just shared. So thank you for that. But anything else you want to tell listeners about the other two books, or these are all such important topics?
I think probably the main thing right now with the election coming up is people should focus on where they want this economy to go. If you want to see the kind of year we had in 2019, where we had the lowest poverty rate going back 60 years, that's 10.5%. That's the lowest since 1959 when they started tracking the data. And the largest single year drop in the poverty rate, and the highest increase in median family income. So family income went up more than it ever had gone up, to a new record high of $68,700. If you want to get back to those days, you really need to vote for Donald Trump, who will cut taxes, continue to reduce regulation, focus on domestic energy. We'll start operating under those renegotiated fairer trade agreements. If you vote for Joe Biden, understand and go to his website. You don't have to believe me on this. Every program this guy proposes, everything is huge government spending. Nothing in there is an incentive for private sector businesses to create jobs. And if you don't have job creation in the private sector, wages don't go up. People can't find jobs. They drop out of the labor force. The economy stagnates, as it did when Obama and Biden were in office. So it's important. This election is very important for your economic future and for your children's economic future, because if Joe Biden wins this election, I don't know if the economy ever recovers. And we're in such a dynamic recovery at the moment. I'd sure like to see that continue.
And the things you didn't mention about 2019 also were that, minorities had it great. Women had it great. We had the lowest unemployment rate for African Americans in, I believe, history since they've been counting. And Latinos, same thing. Female workers, same thing. And it was the first time during Trump's presidency, I'm not sure exactly what year, it might have been 2017 or 18, but it took 41 years for American workers to get a real dollar, meaning adjusted for inflation, pay raise. It took 41 years. And during Trump's administration was the first time there was a real dollar pay raise adjusted for inflation, where Americans were actually making more money in real terms. So, it's amazing. And just look at the stock market. I mean, what happened the minute the election results occurred in 2016, right? The stock market went crazy. It went through the roof because investors and business people were optimistic about growth. And, it was just a sea change. Had Hillary Clinton won, it would have gone the other way completely.
It would never have happened.
Yeah.
We had, under President Trump, we had 24 consecutive months, beginning in March of 2018, where we had more job openings than people unemployed. That had never happened for 1 month. Since the government began tracking the data in 2000. Obama didn't have 1 month where we had more job openings than people unemployed. And for some of those 17 of those 24 months, there were more than 1 million job openings more than people unemployed. Mm-hmm. And beginning in August, because there were so many jobs, employers were competing for employees. We had 20 consecutive months where wage growth, annual wage growth, exceeded 3% every month.
Right. For
20 months. You know how many months there were post-recession for Obama where wage growth exceeded 3%? Zero. Yeah. There were none. So people started coming out of the woodwork to take jobs. The labor force participation rate went up. It went down consistently throughout the Obama administration. And as we just said, particularly for blacks, for Hispanics, for Asians, the poverty rate came way down to historic lows. Median family income went up to historic highs. We can do that again. This will happen again. We are on track for that. But to continue it, we've got to reelect Donald Trump. If you elect Joe Biden, this will all come to an end.
Very interesting. Do you want to give out a website?
Sure. It's Andy.Puzder, Puzder.com. That's my website where everything I write and all my appearances, this one will go on there too. And you can also go online at Amazon and get the book, It's Time to Let America Work Again, or the other books you mentioned, The Capitalist Comeback is probably my favorite of all the books. But this new one that deals with letting America get back to work again is very topical. And I think it'll give you the arguments you need to address other people and to help out your community. So I'm hoping people will give it a shot.
Excellent. And it's a short, easy read too. So that's nice for
40,
today's busy life and short attention span. So that's good for a lot of people who are very busy and can't add another book to their list, because this is a quick one. Andy, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate having you.
My pleasure, Jason. Good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.